Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. I'm Daniel, this is Gary, and neither one of us is actually feeling at our best at this point. For various
so there may be some coughing that goes on, but you're safe.
We might have to edit this a little bit, edit a few things out as we're going through this. We are on week 7 of our journey or study through the Gospel of Mark, and we're right at the end of Passion Week. We're in the end of chapter 12, all of chapter 13, and just right at the beginning of chapter 14 this time. And so there's a little bit in the temple, and then chapter 13 is Jesus and the apostles leaving the temple area, and a really big discussion there about really end time stuff.
Right.
And then a little bit in chapter 14 that sets up what's coming in the crucifixion. So
Right. So even if we back up from there, last week we saw Jesus and the disciples entering Jerusalem as part of Passover, and we saw the nation of Israel continuing to reject Jesus, who he was, and they were continuing to test him, or doing their best to test him too. And maybe that's even too strong of a word, testing. Entrapment might be the right kind of word in there, because what they were trying to do was give him a reason to mess up so that they could justify killing him. And we also heard Jesus describing the nation of Israel as, hey, check them out. They look great from the outside, but when you cut it open, there's just no substance. There's nothing on the inside. So this week we see this continued entrapment happening, and we do see Jesus continuing to teach. And I do think it's important to note that individual people certainly need to make their own individual decision versus the nation as a whole making their decision too.
Because the nation as a whole, like you said, has already rejected him.
Yeah.
But Jesus has never pushed individuals away. It's always been about, even under the nation of Israel, has been about individual faith. The faith of Abraham, like we see in Galatians, is a personal faith, even if the whole nation is, let's say, on hold right now.
Yeah. We do see people who are listening with delight on a couple of the conversations, meaning they get that their leadership is corrupt. They get that, bad things are happening. So they're happy that somebody's jabbing them a little bit.
Yeah, there's a little bit of smackdown going on here between Jesus and the religious leaders.
So it starts right off with probably another trap. We're talking about the what is the greatest commandment? So in Mark, it comes, or it seems to come across as a Jewish leader is asking an honest question. In Matthew, it's treated more as a setup. So, how does it happen? I don't know, but let's just take it at face value in Mark, where somebody is asking Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus gives his response. And the person seems to reflect on it and say, wow, that is a great answer. What about this? What about that? And gets further into the discussion, which is exactly the way things should happen. And this is where I'm saying, this individual Jewish leader may be making a different determination. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Jesus even says you're close.
Yeah,
right?
I love that phrase. You are not, when Jesus saw that he had answered thoughtfully. Yeah. Right. He's actually trying. Right. He said you're not far from the kingdom of God. And I love that because if you take it back to the beginning of Jesus' ministry, it was a Pharisee named Nicodemus who said, okay, so how do I get in? And Jesus said, you must be born again or you can't see the kingdom of God. Here he is at the end of his ministry, and another religious leader is saying, okay, I'm trying to process through all of this stuff. And Jesus said, you're almost there. You're almost there. You're not, you're still.
Yeah. So from our standpoint, we get to hear what the greatest commandment is, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with your mind, and all your strength. Mm-hmm. And then he adds a second part to it, love your neighbor as yourself. And then what I think is awesome is, he's talking to the Jewish leadership that all they have is rules. and they have 600 and some rules, 300 of this kind, 300 of this kind. You have to do this, you can't do this. Rule, check mark, check mark, check mark. He just in 2 sentences encapsulated all of them. Yeah, and basically love God, treat your neighbors the way you treat yourself. Do this and you'll be fine. And it's like, okay, I got a chance here at that one.
And what's interesting is it's not that Jesus just made these up. Let me summarize this for you. But love God comes from Deuteronomy 6, and love your neighbor comes from Leviticus 19. So these are things that are already in the law that God has said, that that just Jesus sort of, brings them together.
Yep. So then it seems like Jesus is getting a little tired that he keeps getting tested. So of course, like a good Jew, like a good rabbi, right?
Spins it around.
I'm going to ask you guys a question. And this is kind of where the fun began. So Jesus switches it up. Hey, I answered your question. Now you need to answer my question. And he asks about David's son and Lord. And the whole idea here is how can Christ be David's son, yet Christ also helps David out by putting his enemies underneath his feet. I think I got that right there.
Well, it's in the
I knew you'd take over.
Yeah, no. So in Psalm 110, David said it's the Lord, so that's God.
Yeah, but I took that as Jesus.
No, it's actually Jehovah says to my Lord, which is Messiah.
Okay.
So the point is the Messiah is David's son of David, all right? It's the whole thing. So how can David say to his son, "You are my Lord"?
Right.
Right. So the Lord says, Jehovah says to my Lord, who is Messiah, sit at my right hand.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Right, Christ.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Christ. So we've got almost 3 if you want, Jehovah and then Messiah, and then David is sort of seeing this from a third person.
Yeah. So how can Christ come from the lineage of David, but also be on top?
Yeah. Right.
There. Which, good question.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to us it's obvious, right? We already know the answer. There doesn't seem to be an answer there, right?
Yeah.
That comes out of it.
Yeah, not to them because they're not expecting.
Yeah.
They're not expecting Messiah to be both human and deity, right?
Yeah.
We see that they didn't have that. Right. But by quoting this, I think Jesus is also reminding them of who he is, because this is Psalm 110 is a huge messianic passage, the number 1 psalm quoted in the New Testament, and the number 1 passage quoted in Hebrews alone. Actually, it's really interesting. And I think Jesus is using this, just pointing back to himself. And we don't see it quite in Mark, but I do think that he's...
Yeah, well, again, if Mark is as a servant, he wouldn't be pointing.
Yeah, it's true. He's not
exalting
himself, right?
Yeah. But this is also where we see the crowds were listening to him with delight. Jesus then warns about the experts of the law, and basically comes down to, hey, these guys are going to receive a more severe punishment, which I think is interesting. That also means that there's levels of punishment that are going to happen.
Well, there's levels of reward.
Which you would hope there would be.
Yeah, there's levels of reward. I would expect there to be levels of punishment. And if we take this into James 3, James says that not everybody should be a teacher, because teachers are going to be held to a higher standard. So that's true in the church age, but even here, I mean, these are the teachers of the law. Yeah. So if you're going to stand here and say this is what God says, God had better say that.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, then he follows it up with the widow's offering too, which is kind of also a slam on the Jewish leadership, or it could be a slam on the Jewish leadership, right? They didn't necessarily get paid a salary, but what they did receive was gifts, and those gifts were sometimes expected to be given. So, like, even in today's world, if somebody is a better orator, somebody is always asking for, more and more money, sometimes, unfortunately, they get it.
Yeah.
Right? And same way in these times. So Jesus and his crew are all in the temple, which had to be a fascinating thing. And this is a time of when it was probably completely full. It was probably hard to walk around in there.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the first things there were places to put your donations. So they were standing around watching people putting in their donations. And we've heard in the past that, these were designed so as you drop the money in, it goes down and it can make more noise or less noise, those types of things. And a little old lady comes in and puts in, her 2 pennies, or the widow's offering is where we're at. But out of poverty, she gave. And Jesus points it out on how what she gave was actually more because she had nothing. And she had 2 mites left, and she gave them both. And for whatever reason, reading it this time really hit me. She had 2. She easily could have just given 1.
Given 1, right?
But she gave everything out of her poverty. Mm-hmm. And he's like, hey, these other people out of their riches are giving an amount, not making light of that.
Right.
But she gave more.
Yeah. Yeah, so she was giving from, obviously, percentage-wise.
Yeah,
she was
exactly.
far more. But I think it's more than just percent. I don't think it's focused on the numbers.
Yeah,
it's thinking on her heart.
Yep.
This is what I have for God, and it's not nearly as much as I would love to give, but here's what I can give.
And probably I'm happy giving it versus, well, I gotta bring you along so you can see that I'm giving. Type of deal. And again, it follows through to today, right? Give with a happy heart. This church is no different, right? We live on donations here.
Right.
So,
yep.
We try
give together, and that's
we try not to make a big deal out of it week after week, but it is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the last time Jesus will be in the temple until, depending on where they have their trials, in the next day or two, wherever they hold him for trial in the different places. This is the last time he leaves the temple, and he doesn't come back into it now for some time.
Yeah.
Going out into chapter 13, as they're leaving the temple. The temple is under a remodel period. Herod the Great started remodeling the temple, and of course he died just after Jesus was born. While they were in Egypt, before they came back from Egypt. So I don't know how much of the remodeling was still going on, but I think it was, right? I think it was remodeled for it was like road construction. It was like 46 years or something. It was constantly.
Oh, and when you're done, you start over. It's kind of like painting a house, right? When you're finally done painting, you start over at the first room.
And so the apostles are walking out, and they're like, "Oh, look at this, Nuki! Look at this! Look at this! Isn't this so beautiful?"
Right.
And Jesus, being the downer that he is.
Exactly what happens.
You see all these great, beautiful stones. Yeah, isn't this great? Yeah, they're going to be destroyed. Not even one is standing on top of each other.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
So we're at about 37 AD, right? When he says that?
No, 33. 33. The year he died was 33.
Okay. And then AD 70?
70, yeah.
Is when the temple
so
actually...
not even quite 40 years. Yeah.
So relatively soon.
Yeah.
So that leads into it. So they leave, right? And you can just imagine as they're walking back, because they didn't stay in Jerusalem, so they had to go over to the Mount of Olives, right, where they were staying, and they could look back over and see the temple, though, and you could see their discussion going, all right, you just said this place is going to be destroyed. When? What's going to happen?
And how do we know the sign?
Yeah.
Of
what to look for?
And it's interesting because it says the sign. When will these things happen? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to take place? Now, how are we supposed to know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So this gets into end times.
Yeah.
Which can definitely be interesting.
Well, and as we're recording this right now, and it'll be out there for a long time, obviously, but as we're recording this right now, we're in our church going through the book of the Revelation. Right. So some of this is
So I want to spend all my time right here.
This stuff I know, right?
Well, the stuff I want to know.
Yeah, right.
Well, and it's true today, right? Because it's true for us. How do we know when the end times are going to be happening? What do we need to look for? Because Jesus says, stay alert, stay alert, stay alert.
Yeah.
You can't stay alert for 2,000 years.
No, but I think the biggest thing that we have to understand is that there is no church yet.
Right.
The church doesn't exist at this point. What they have is the whole Old Testament, which is prophecy about Messiah's coming and the rescue of Jerusalem and bringing Israel into prominency and Antichrist and all, the kingdom and all this stuff. There's no church. So when they're thinking, when are you coming? They're not thinking of the rapture of the church because it doesn't exist yet.
Right.
They're thinking of, we know there's going to be what we call Daniel's 70th week. We know there's going to be disaster. We know there's going to be trouble. We know that Messiah is going to come. We know all of that. So when is that happening? So we can't apply this. We can't think of us anywhere in here.
No, we always think of us.
We're everywhere in the Bible, right? Yeah. So this doesn't have anything to do with the church. It doesn't have anything to do with the rapture of the church. All of this takes place on the timeline. We believe that the rapture, Jesus is going to take the church off of the planet, take us to heaven with him, and then the rest of the end times timeline is going to take place. That's where we find this in here, is after the church has been taken to heaven.
Raptured.
Yeah. So he starts off by saying, be careful. There's going to be a lot of false Christs. There's going to be a lot of false teachers. And he uses the term at the end of verse 8, the beginning of birth pains. We use the term contractions, right? So the concept that shows up in the Old Testament and the New Testament is contractions. So, at the beginning, the woman, my wife has had four children, your wife has had two, and it's like, ooh, I have a pain. We got to get to the hospital.
Yeah.
And you call the hospital and they're like, yeah, you got lots of time. You got lots of time, right? But what they're watching for is for them to get closer together.
Right. And more violent.
And stronger, right?
Yeah.
More violent, right? Yeah. And then as they come, all of a sudden, it's just like boom, 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 and then delivery. That's how we see the timeline happening.
Right. So you see every one of these happening after the rapture.
Yeah.
Versus things like many will come in my name.
Yep.
So even today we see people coming in his name, but that's not what we should be looking for.
Yeah,
or
wars and rumors of wars. Yeah, all of that stuff.
We're definitely seeing that today.
There's definitely similarity, but the principle that I always teach is that similarity does not mean equality. Just because you see two things in Scripture that are like, they look like they're the same thing, doesn't necessarily mean they are. We have to put them in the context in which they're given. So, yeah, there's going to be specific persecution against Israel during that time, against believers during that time. Once the church is gone, there's still going to be people who come to believe in Jesus.
Okay, so even one of the things is the gospel has to be preached to all nations.
Yeah.
So my thought process was we need to preach the gospel to all the nations, then this will happen. You're saying the opposite, right? The rapture will happen, which I guess also makes sense, right? Because if the rapture happens, all the Christians are off, which means new people have to discover the Bible, have to discover Christianity, have to get that word out to everyone.
Well, and at least at the very beginning, that some of the judgments are really going to destroy infrastructure and stuff. But if Jesus were to come back today, right now, you have all this technology, how much gospel presentations are on YouTube, how many podcasts are still out there, how many Bibles are going to be left behind. Plus, there will be a lot of people say, in fact, Revelation 7 shows that this will be a time of unprecedented evangelism and salvations.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Chapter 15 tells us that before the end actually comes, God is going to send an angel through the air to preach the gospel. Everyone will have a chance to hear it at least once.
Yeah. It'd be hard to deny.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we read through this, through verse 13, we're seeing big picture stuff. Verse 14 is this abomination of desolation, which Daniel talks about in Daniel chapter 9. eventually Antichrist will have an image of himself created. Right? We don't know exactly all the details about that. He'll stand that up in the temple in Jerusalem, and he will declare himself to be God. 2 Thessalonians 2 says he'll place himself above every god, and he will demand to be worshipped by everybody. Jew, Gentile, Muslim, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your faith, doesn't matter anything. I am your God. So Jesus warns about that, because if you don't do that, then the persecution against those who don't will really intensify.
Right, and that's where it's flee Judah. Right, don't even go back. Don't even get your coat. Don't even do anything.
Right.
Hopefully it's not during winter. Hopefully you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
But get out.
Yeah, you've got to run, and God will supernaturally protect Israel during that time, and I think believers during that time. But yeah, it's not going to be fun.
Right. So then at some point, the Son of Man comes back.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. At the end, it's a period of 7 years, and Son of Man is a messianic title. He is Messiah. Son of Man will come back, and there will be a series of battles. Most people think of Armageddon as this one thing. Yep. It'll be a series of at least 3 battles. And then, he'll reclaim Jerusalem. Satan's armies, Antichrist's armies will be wiped out, and all of that stuff will be gone. And then there will be, we'll see in our series, there will be like 75 days where God has to do some judgments on different groups and clean up the earth, because it's going to be a mess, and some other stuff. And then the kingdom will actually start.
So from Mark's standpoint, he doesn't include all that
Right.
all that information. It's very much condensed, but he does say, the Messiah will be coming back. The sun will be darkened. The moon will not give light. The stars will be falling from heaven. The powers in the heavens will be shaken. I mean, those are some pretty big statements there.
Yeah, a lot of that comes just directly. I mean, those are quotes or allusions right out of the Old Testament. Joel 2 talks about that. Zechariah talks about it. Isaiah talks about that. This is all stuff that these guys, remember, he has a small audience. He has 12 guys he's talking to, Jesus, right? These guys have heard this stuff since they were little. This is what they've been waiting for. Right. And so he's
and what
tying
they expect.
Yeah, he's tying it back to himself. I'm the one who's going to do this. Right. All these verses that you've memorized, all this stuff that that the prophets, 700-800 years ago said is going to happen. It still will happen. It's still future. And for us now, it's still future, but for them, he's like, it's not happening right now. It's still future. You've been waiting for 8 centuries.
Right. And then again, from Mark's standpoint, then the Son of Man will come. And the important point from a Mark standpoint is the servant's not coming, right? Right. The Messiah is coming.
Right.
And,
he won't be a servant anymore.
Yeah. So then it gets into the parable of the fig tree, which we hear about all this. We know there's future events. And then I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place.
Yeah.
So how do we reckon? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's right? The big question, right? So usually when Jesus says this generation, he's talking about the people right in front of him.
Right.
And so there's an interpretation called preterism that says all of this stuff happened in the past because this generation, which is usually about 40 years, and interestingly from 33 to 70 is pretty close to 40 years. Right. So Rome comes in, tears down Jerusalem, and a lot of people say, see, that is the fulfillment of all of this. You say, but what about the sun and the moon and the abomination of desolation, all this stuff? Say, well, all of that's really symbolic.
Yeah, because you have to.
Yeah. Right. What about the entire book of the Revelation? Nah, that's completely symbolic. This all happened literally back in AD 70. There's nothing left to fulfill when it comes to this stuff. So that's one.
Right.
Well, that's one option for this generation, you guys standing right here. The other option, which is what I prefer, is that when Jesus says this generation, he's always talking about the generation of the context. And in most of his teaching, the context is the people right in front of him, right? But this, he's talking about a future event, and he doesn't tell when the future event is going to happen.
Yeah, so he's still in that same context.
So the context is future. So when he says this generation will not pass away, I think he's talking about this generation of that future context whenever that happens. And I don't think this generation is the point as much as this generation will not pass away until they see the whole thing. It's not that this is going to start and it's going to take 2,000 years.
Right.
It's that when it starts,
it's a short enough turn.
that generation will see the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how I interpret it.
Good. All right, so then we get into chapter 14, and we see the Jewish authorities still continuing to try to trap Jesus. How do we arrest him? And the determination is now blatant. We want to kill him.
Yeah.
He's got to go.
I think it's interesting, though, at the beginning they said, well, let's wait until after Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is going to be 8 days, because Passover is the beginning and then there's a 7-day feast. Yeah. They're like, well, let's at least wait until this is over so that there's not a riot among the people. It's possible they were also thinking, let's wait until after Pentecost, because the people come in for Passover and they're still going to be there for the next 50 days. So they may have actually been planning for let's say a 2-week to a 2-month window. They weren't going to do it right now. Yeah. Something is going to precipitate this, that it has to happen right now. And we'll see that next week. But it's spoilers. I think it's God. I think God is, pushing the timeline here.
That'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
Right, yeah. But these guys who were so insistent, and we've seen many times, how are we going to kill him? How are we going to assassinate him? How are we going to do this? They're like, oh, it's Passover.
Yeah,
it's feast season. I guess our assassination plans have to be on hold.
Yeah. Versus now, it's like, either something happens where we need to take that opportunity, or the opportunity is presenting himself. We need to take advantage of it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So the there's two things that we end on. So they're in Bethany, and they're having dinner at Simon's house, who is a leopard. Leper, not a leopard.
Not a leopard.
And Jesus is anointed with perfume, and we don't get an understanding of it, but reading the commentary, this perfume was incredibly expensive, and she used a bunch of it. And the thought process is, this is a year's worth of wages that she anointed Jesus with. At Passover time, historically, it's been a time where people give money to the poor, and so I think part of why the 12 are like almost offended on, why did you waste that? Why wouldn't we have given this money to the poor? Mm-hmm. So I think that part is in there, and Jesus explains, why it was appropriate. And then it ends with, we see Judas making a decision, and we'll see that he, the follow through of betraying Jesus.
Yeah. Mark doesn't tell us, but some of the other gospel accounts say that it was Judas specifically who points out that this was wasteful, right?
Yeah, they also don't say, or Mark doesn't say who gave the perfume. John says it was Mary, Lazarus, and Martha's sister.
Yeah.
There, which makes sense. That's where they were. So that ends with our reading for the week.
Right.
An incredible amount in here. Like always, we knew there was no way we'd get through everything, and there's so much in here, and there's many individual messages that I'm sure we've heard over the years too on individual pieces here.
We try to hit the big points, but obviously we don't hit everything, and so as we're going through this, some of chapter 13 we'll get into a lot more in our Revelation series, but that's quite a ways from the time of this recording until we get to that point. Yeah. So as you have questions, make sure you bring that up. And Gary would be happy to answer anything that you can come up with.
Yeah,
right?
You got a bad habit of doing this.
Well, next time it's 2 weeks left in Mark. and a couple of long chapters. Actually, some of the longest chapters of Mark still coming up, and that's why it's still going to be, why is it 2 weeks for 3 chapters? There are a couple of long chapters in here, so we'll split this over 2 weeks, and we'll see you next time.